Set up Azure AD Connect. Hey everyone, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget we're going to set up our Azure Active Directory Connect service to synchronize our users from a local on-premise Active Directory up into Office 365. I'll show you how to install and run the initial synchronization, and I'll show you the PowerShell commandlets that you need to use in order to control the synchronization schedule and force the synchronization when you want to. Why don't we jump right in? We'll get started by installing Azure AD Connect on an Active Directory server. I've got the page loaded up right here where you download Azure Active Directory Connect from. And I've already downloaded it and got it copied over to my virtual machine where I'm running AD. And we'll just launch the installer. It's a fairly simple, straightforward wizard-based installer, so you should be familiar with how it works. And we can either do a custom installation or an express settings installation. And it tells you right up here what the express settings are. These are the ones that we want to stick to. But notice if you have a single Windows Active Directory forest, which I do in this environment, it's going to synchronize the identities in the forest out to my Office 365 account. It's also going to configure password synchronization. It's going to start an initial sync. It's going to synchronize all attributes, and it'll enable something called auto upgrade. Now, if I want different settings than this, I would simply click Customize right here, and I would get access to a whole bunch of different custom options that I could use. But I actually want to use the express settings. Those are going to be easiest, and then we can configure the installation and the synchronization after we've done this. The first thing we need to do is connect to Azure AD, in which I'm going to use my global administrator account to do. So you do have to use a global administrator to set up Azure AD Connect. Once it connects to the online account and verifies my credentials, it will connect to my local ADDS domain. I'm going to use a local administrator account, or my domain admin, to do this. And perfect, there we go. Now notice one of the things that it's telling me here. I have two Active Directory UPN suffixes in my local ADDS domain, and that's cbtnuggets.local and cbtoffice.com. cbtoffice.com gets set up in my nugget. I'm preparing the domain for Azure Active Directory Connect. And over here we can see that Azure does not have cbtnuggets.local, but it does have cbtoffice.com as verified. Now, cbtnuggets.local is not a publicly routable domain name, so I've just got to leave it not added. I've got to leave it exactly like that because it's not going to work in Office 365. If I wanted to, I could add another UPN suffix for my other domain names, including my .onmicrosoft.com domain name, if I wanted to use that as well. But the way it was set up, the way I prepared it in that nugget was fine. Here it is, ready to go. I'm simply going to click Install, and this is going to install all the requisite utilities, and then it will start a synchronization event and actually copy the users from my local ADDS up into Office 365. Now, while that's installing, I do want to show you one thing that I did ahead of time here, and that is I put test user 3 at cbtoffice.com into my Office 365 account. This is prior to synchronizing, this first synchronization being run. And the reason I did this is because you might very well have in your environment already users set up both in your local on-premise Active Directory account as well as up inside of the Office 365 service. And you don't want to duplicate those users. If a user exists in both, you want them to be linked up or to be matched up. What I want you to know is that the matching will occur automatically. Azure AD Connect will make that match based on this identity right here, the primary mailbox for the user account. So test user 3 at cbtoffice.com is a really, really important indicator. If I come down here into my Active Directory, my local Active Directory, and bring up Active Directory users and computers, scroll down and find my test users. Test user 3 here, you can see their account is test user 3 at cbtoffice.com for the UPN, the user login name. So that is how the matchup is going to occur. This means that when the synchronization first happens, and when it happens in the future, test user 3 will be matched on this, and they will not be duplicated inside of the Office 365 portal. I'll only have one instance of this user. Now, when that installation and configuration completes, you'll notice it tells me that the Azure AD Connect configuration succeeded and the synchronization process has been initiated. So really, with nothing more than running that wizard, I'm able to get my initial synchronization started. And by the way, routine synchronizations from my on-premise Active Directory are going to be headed up to the cloud. If I let's close all this down for right now. Why don't I bring back my portal here, and we will simply refresh this page because I expect to see a whole pile of users up in the portal now. And there they all are, user 1, 2, 3, and 4 from cbtoffice.com. Now notice there's also an on-premise Active Directory synchronization user account. That is a specific user service account that is used to add users into the portal, right? The portal has to be able to add users, or the software has to be able to add users, and so it needs a service account in order to do so. And also notice that there's only one instance of test user 3 at cbtoffice.com. Because it was able to soft match on the email address and the username, it did not duplicate that user. So it matched those users up, and it ensured that I didn't end up with duplicate users inside of my portal. Now let's take a look at a couple of settings on Azure AD Connect. Minimize my server manager here. Launch Azure AD Connect, and the main menu is going to give me a couple of different tasks that I can work with. Let's begin with View Current Configuration. Click Next. This will show me my current synchronization configuration. It's basically a report of how things exist today. So I can see that my source anchor is something called Object GUID. So that's how it is uniquely identifying accounts inside of my local ADDS service. It's using the Object GUID. I can see the user principal name. It's using the user principal name attribute. I can see my write back, like my device write back, and my group write back, my password write back. Those are currently disabled, although password synchronization is currently enabled. So in case you're wondering, password synchronization is going up from my local account to Office 365. So any password changes made on the local ADDS account will get migrated up into Office 365, whereas write back, like I described in another nugget, is the process of writing any changes that the user makes to their own password in Office 365 back down here to the local directory. If I want to change some of these options, I choose the second choice here, Customize Synchronization Options, and it's going to make me connect to Azure AD every time I want to change any options. And you can see here are my choice of directories that I am synchronizing. So I've only got one active directory here. The forest is cbtnuggets.local. If I had multiple forests and multiple directories here, I would be able to choose which directories and which forests were included in the synchronization and which ones were not. Now, an interesting challenge here, users may exist in multiple forests, but you only want them to exist once inside of Office 365. And again, that UPN, that logon name, the test user 3 at cbtoffice.com, is ultimately going to be the unique identifier for a user. So you want to make sure that you're using that UPN suffix appropriately across all of your forests so that users don't get duplicated or doubled up inside of Office 365. I can also use domain and OU filtering, and this is going to be really, really important, I think, for most users on the system. I suspect that the number one way that you are going to want to filter or determine which users are and which users are not included in the synchronization from your local on-premise AD to the cloud, to Office 365, is to select specific OUs, organizational units. And you can see here that when I change this to only sync selected OUs, this is everything that's already chosen by default. I could pull all these off and stick only to the users OU, this built-in users OU here. And if I had my own OUs inside of the directory, if I'd created custom OUs, which you almost certainly have, I could filter down to just those OUs as well. So you get an incredible amount of control over who's being synchronized up into the cloud using domain and OU filtering. Last thing here, we have the optional features that we can include, and these are the things that we just talked about, like the password write back and the group write back and the device write back. So if I want password write back included, I simply check it, click Next, and it's going to configure and make these changes and update the service with what I've chosen. And notice that it will configure another synchronization when this process completes. So once that completes, you can see that it configures it and a synchronization process has been initiated. Now, another thing that you may want to do is control the synchronization process. Either kick it off yourself or change the schedule on which it runs. And all of that is done through PowerShell. I'm going to bring up a PowerShell window here. And the first thing that we'll look at is the scheduler, which you can see with the get-ad sync scheduler command. If we just run it as is, you're going to see a bunch of different properties for the current schedule. So allowed sync cycle interval, currently effective sync cycle interval. Notice they're at 30 minutes, so a synchronization is going to run every 30 minutes. Also notice the next sync cycle policy type is delta. What that means is that the next synchronization type is going to be only changes that have occurred in the database, not that initial synchronization. There are certain instances where you may need to rerun an initial or full synchronization, and that's in particular if you make any changes to the sync rules or if you change the filtering for what should and should not be synced, then you're going to need what's called an initial synchronization. Now you can change this schedule with the set-AD sync scheduler command. I believe that's right. Yeah, and a couple of important parameters. The customized sync cycle interval, let's say 30 minutes is no good for you. You could change it to 1 hour just by passing in that parameter right there, 010000. The next sync cycle policy type, notice, can be delta or initial. So if you happen to know that you need an initial full synchronization, or you think that you might, you can change this to initial, or you can leave it at delta. Sync cycle enabled is also important. If you want to disable the synchronization cycle for any reason, you can change this to be false, and that will disable the synchronization cycle. We don't want to do that. I'll leave it at true, and I'll change the policy type and the next sync cycle interval. And notice here it's telling me that the policy I've provided, the interval change, is only going to happen after the next scheduled sync cycle. So I can either wait for that 30 minutes window to come up and it will run the one it planned to run, and then it will run the schedule that I implemented, or as it indicates, I can run the start-AD sync cycle commandlet, pass in the policy type if I want that I want to run. Let's run an initial. And that's going to kick off a sync cycle right away. There's my result success. It's now synchronizing my directory with an initial synchronization up to Office 365. And I can see now that my get AD sync scheduler has been updated to be a 1 hour, and the next policy type has gone back to delta because the initial is run, and now it's simply going to run a delta unless either I tell it to run an initial or some change occurs in directory, an Active Directory, that forces it to be an initial. Well, that concludes this nugget on setting up Azure AD Connect for Microsoft Office 365. Just to recap, Azure AD Connect is the utility that synchronizes your users from a local on-premise AD server up into Office 365. It's very easy to install. You can simply run the .msi file and choose either express settings or custom settings if you want to configure your own custom synchronization process. At the end of the installation, it runs an initial sync, and after that it runs a synchronization every 30 minutes, which you can change using the appropriate PowerShell commandlets. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.